Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our event tonight, The Future of U.S. Policy in the Middle East. I'm Tori Holt. I run the Dickey Center here at Dartmouth, and we're delighted to have a great audience both here in Haldeman Hall and with us online tonight. As you've often heard me say, one of the reasons we do these events is to uphold the spirit of our founder, John Sloan Dickey, who really thought that bringing the great issues of the world to campus was important for the students, but for our whole community to try and understand the world and to understand the tools necessary to make a difference in that world. And so this is one of an ongoing series of events and discussions that hope to honor that inclination and aspiration and part of what the Dickey Center does. Many of you know this event tonight is part of our Middle East initiative. It's a collaborative effort between faculty and Middle Eastern studies, Jewish studies, and across the campus. We have support from the president, the provost's office, Elizabeth Smith, dean of faculty, and many others who have helped come together, particularly after the events of October of 2023. We're lucky that the faculty have worked together here for a decade, creating dialogue in real time, but those events really showed us what was possible on a campus and having very hard conversations. So this initiative is meant to have a few events per term, bring scholars and academics and practitioners to campus, and continue the effort to really try and have conversations. And it's often said it's for the students, which it certainly is, but it's actually for all of us to learn how to ongoing teach ourselves how to have those kind of conversations. So why this conversation now? I always take a look at the news headlines before we come to an event, and I can't tell you how much this is in the news. Obviously, President Trump today is in the Middle East himself, visiting the Gulf nations. He's already made at least one announcement that the United States may be lifting sanctions on Syria. He's clearly interested in business deals throughout the region. And there's even an offer that Air Force One could be refurbished by a country from the Middle East. You also saw in the news the release of an Israeli-American hostage by Hamas, but also the war going on in Gaza and the threat of famine and starvation there, as well as news of efforts to come to an end with the Houthis in Yemen and even possibly a deal in Iran. And I haven't even touched all the countries in the region or all the reasons we might want to have this conversation. So who better than somebody who has spent much of his professional career in diplomacy, negotiation, and trying to understand a region? And I'm very biased towards people from my home state of Maine. But the diplomat we have with us today is not just from Maine, but has deep roots across the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and even Russia. And so he brings with the sort of smarts of a New England person with this international savvy of someone with roots in many, many countries and cultures. And our guest, as I have now foreshadowed, is Ambassador Henry Wooster. He's a career U.S. diplomat. He is currently serving in the U.S. State Department as the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs. He's also been our U.S. Ambassador to the Kingdom of Jordan and the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for both the Maghreb and Egypt. He also had senior roles in Paris and Amman, and I'm sure many places that I'm not here to list. We're really happy that he's been able to come and share his experience and knowledge with us, both as a diplomat and someone very familiar with the region. And ably moderating and chairing the discussion today is our fine colleague, also retired Ambassador Erica Barks-Ruggles, who we've been delighted to have here in residence since the fall, who is the Magro Family Fellow in International Affairs. She herself has been an ambassador, including in Rwanda. She was the chief head of mission for UNESCO, the senior representative to the National Telecommunications Union. She ran the International Organization Bureau and also famously was the deputy to Susan Rice, a tough and important job. So a note on process, I'll be handing this off to her. She will kick off with a moderated discussion, and then we'll turn to the audience, as is our tradition. Students go first, so please get ready for those conversations, and then we'll open up to the larger community. And least but not last but and not least either is just huge thanks to my Dickey colleagues who make this all look easy, but put so much work into fine-tuning the event, logistics, and getting us all into the room on time for such conversations. So please join me in welcoming our guest and moderator.
Great. Thanks so much, Tori, for that very kind introduction. And Henry, Ambassador Wooster. Thank you so much for being with us this afternoon on a glorious day here in New Hampshire. You and I go back quite a ways in our foreign service careers and have worked on some tricky Middle East issues together, you more so than I. And so I guess I'd like to start where we started 20 years ago on Iran, when it was a two-person shop or a one-and-a-half-person shop, really, at the State Department. Things have changed a lot over the last 20 years, including in Iran. And so I'd like to start out with what's happening domestically in Iran before we get to kind of the bigger pictures. Supreme Leader Khamenei is getting old. His population is getting younger. And we've seen these waves of protests over the course of the last 10, 15 years. Rooftop protests, the green, quote-unquote, revolution that didn't happen, the hijab protests. Where are things going in Iran itself? How do you see Iran sorting itself out? Their leadership's under quite a bit of economic stress, yes. Domestic stress, but also international stress. Where do you see the future, the next 5 years going in Iran?
Well, as Erica, as you well know, every diplomat dreads the question of, where's the future going to go? Watching in our own careers, much less lifetimes, things that all of our experts didn't see come to pass. So with that risk assessment, that proviso having been put out there, let me go ahead and offer some thoughts, if I might. You hit upon some of the key elements in terms of where things are going. Those are the things we can see, we can observe, we can, dare I use the verb, know. Right? The economy, the aging supreme leader, a population that is about 70% of the country who is 30-something and younger, and that continuing divergence. So we see all of that. At the same time, we have, since the Iranian Revolution, seen a regime that is maintaining a very tight hold on its people domestically, contrary to some of the ambitions and occasionally analyses that one can see, and I'm talking now about stuff available in the public. The notion that having one or another draconian state leader with repression in place is going to, in turn, push down on this very young population. And what do you know? They're going to be running through the streets, maybe not quite with American flags, but wanting to get away from this. And there'll be this ferment, and there's almost a political axiom of physics that will occur. And that's the generous, if you will, and very aspirational reading of the situation. And as all of you, I think, in the room will have guessed or know, that actually isn't what's happening. That's not what has come to pass. So what does that mean then? If we don't see a people who are increasingly doing that work, which has been the ambition and hope of many U.S. administrations, that the people will take care of it. Well, that's not occurring. The people are learning to adapt to it, to weather it, if you will, and that's what they have done. So again, please, with an understanding amongst all of us that their weathering and adapting should not be interpreted as they can't wait to come out in our corner. But I think we're still in for tough sledding. We still must face the prospect, which we have seen again and again now, stepping away from history books and just into our own careers and lifetimes. Yeah. Think most recently of the fall of Assad. Who saw it coming? No one. Yeah. Right? So they didn't see it coming. We've got numerous examples, again, in our own recent past, at least those of us of a certain age in the room, right? That we can remember firsthand from seeing with the Soviet Union. We saw it in Central Europe, Eastern Europe, and so forth and so on. So I don't expect that when comes the moment with the supreme leader or the regime, we're actually going to be able to pinpoint it. I do not expect that will happen. And I suspect that if history is any prologue here, we may very well not even be looking in the right space or direction when it occurs. So that's a long-winded way of telling you, I don't really know. I'm not really sure where this is going to go, but I know what the past has shown us. Now, we come up to the present moment where we're having conversations, and I'm using that word deliberately, not negotiations, at least not by the standard of the United States. We're not having a negotiation with Iran, but we are meeting with them. You can see this publicly. And we are trying to discern who's on the other side of this table, how serious is the intent to come to an accommodation, a deal, an agreement, pick the moniker that you think works best. What we do know is that it has been U.S. policy, and it remains so, and President Trump has been absolutely clear about Iran will not have a nuclear weapon. We put that on the column of things we know as opposed to don't yet know or ambiguities. We know that to be the case. So where else does that leave us? It's between where we are at the moment, the unknown and question marks, and that one red, bright guardrail.
Yeah. So discussions going on.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for using that term.
Yeah, I was listening. I pay attention. So moving a bit to the east from Iran, Iraq, their neighbor. We used to talk a lot about Iraq. We used to be pretty minutely involved in the day-to-day of everything in Iraq. Obviously, that changed when we withdrew from Iraq during the Obama administration. And frankly, it's kind of hard to find things in the news right now about Iraq. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's a stable, thriving democracy either. So catch us up on Iraq. Where are we on Iraq? What are we worried about? And what do we see as potential opportunity, signs of hope there?
The fundamental thread that runs throughout our Iraq interests and our Iraq policies, we want Iraq and its sovereignty to be bolstered. We want it as strong as it can be as a sovereign entity. Think of who their neighbor is, among others, right?
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that we want to ensure that we protect, or protect against maybe is a more accurate formulation, which is that it is not a subsidiary of Iran, neither in the formal sense nor in the informal sense, but de facto. We don't want that to happen.
Yeah.
The fact that the two live next to one another and states that live next to one another would have a relationship is not something we find prohibitive, but we do not want there to be depredations from Iran in the form that we have seen, which is to basically pull in tight on the Shia groups that are there, create a de facto Shia project next door, and satellites may be a little out of date as a term, but where Iraq isn't its own enterprise. It's not its own state in the understanding of what it is to be a sovereign state. Control your own borders, have autonomy about your decisions, so forth and et cetera. So that's what we want to protect against. Beyond that, of course, it's a huge linchpin state. I mean, it's really hard to look at the Middle East and pick any one of the states and go, well, they don't really matter. We can afford for that to be unstable. I'm not a systems person per se, but I know it fits well within systems theory where everything matters, right? If something goes wrong here, something goes wrong here, or it has an effect. And it's usually not a positive effect, and it almost never redounds to the benefit of U.S. interests. So those are the kinds of things that we're guarding against. When you and I were working on Iraq, and in case you're wondering, it wasn't 1901, but it's a couple of years ago, but it wasn't that long ago, or when we were serving there, you're right, it was the paramount interest. The entire U.S. government, several administrations were behind it. And it was a clear message inside the Foreign Service. This is a premium issue. This is the priority issue. This is what keeps the president and the secretary up at night. So we're well past that at this point, as you've noted. But not without consequential interests there. By the way, we had something that would have been unforeseeable in my day there, a collection of U.S. companies, corporations, and multinationals signed less than a month ago deals there for, I hope my math is right, I don't have the note in front of me, I think it was over $30 billion worth of projects and investments that were signed with these contracts, that were signed with these U.S. companies and corporations. And this was an Iraqi event held by, in effect, they're not really the Chamber of Commerce, but in effect, that sort of a body, right?
Yeah.
To attract business and attract business interests. So if you had been attracted to them before, the security conditions on the ground would have made you say, yeah, no, we're not going to do it. But we are moving inching our way forward, maybe not at the light speed that most Americans come to like for most everything we're engaged upon, but we're making progress rather than going backwards.
Yeah, well, that's a hopeful sign.
Inshallah, as we say in the Middle East.
Inshallah. So turning to one of the issues that Tori mentioned in her introduction, of course, President Trump is in the region on his first major trip of his administration, replicating what he did as his first major trip in his first administration, including his first stop, Saudi Arabia. He's also going to the UAE and Qatar. What issues do you see as the main focus for this trip? And kind of, there's always deliverables, right, from these trips, the expectations of things that are going to be announced. And will that include issues about the Abraham Accords? There's been a lot of kind of under sotto voce buzz about the possibility of something there.
So many things to touch upon there, Erica. I'm trying to think of which thread to pull on first. Okay, let's go with, what's the objective here? What's the point of the exercise, so to speak? So we've got multiple angles here that are going on at the same time where it's difficult to say this one, no pun intended, trumps that one.
Yeah.
Sorry, it was a little bit of a pun. But in any event, okay, so fundamentally, whenever a head of state, in particular the United States head of state, goes overseas to make a state visit, visits another country, right? It is first and foremost about assurances. It's a political assurance. It is the supreme political assurance that the United States can give another country. We send the President of the United States, this one, previous ones to come, we send that, the President goes to that country and spends time. Now, the particulars of what's on the agenda, yes, that will always vary, right? Yeah. Commercial deals, security, whatever the case may be. And in this case, you've hit all of them. So you will have seen the media headlines about various of the deals that are on the table in the commercial and private sector that are being signed and that were being pledged. Those are hugely important to the administration. This was a pledge and a promise, and this is the delivery of that promise. To put it in common parlance, box checked, right? Nothing's over till it's over, but this is a pledge that was made. And the amounts of money that if you take all three of the states that are involved, as you noted, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE, and you look at the investments into the United States, there are, of course, investments going in the other direction, but investments into the United States, it absolutely, really unequivocally goes into a win column for U.S. interests. If you look at it on the military and security, look, it's a tough neighborhood. We've already talked about one of the anxiety concerns that a number of the states in the Gulf have to wrestle with routinely, their neighbor, Iran. There are the Houthis. They're a proxy of Iran. They're armed, equipped, trained, given target information by Iran. So think Iran still, an extension of. So, they want assurances. They also have pocketbooks, and they want to be able to they have a vision for their countries, and they want to be able to make their own, among other things. They're looking at their industry, they're looking at their economy, they're looking at universities, I don't know that Dartmouth has a campus in the Gulf yet, but some of your colleagues in the Ivy League, among other U.S. universities, do. So they're looking at it in a number of dimensions, and security, of course, is one as well. And here we look at the weapons buys, defense agreements, security protocols, so forth, and et cetera, that you can be sure are being discussed or in the conversation. And then you also have noted the Abraham Accords. Yeah. So for generations of American diplomacy, and certainly in the wake of the creation of the Israeli state in 1948, American diplomats have been talking about something called regional integration. So if you take regional integration, decode it, which we'll do in just a moment if you haven't already done it in your heads, in Abraham Accords, it's synonymous. Yeah. Are there some tweaks or differences? Okay, but the objective is the same. Yeah. We have an ally, among other allies, that we have in the region, in this case, Israel. And we would like to see more of what we saw in '94 from the peace treaties that Egypt and Jordan struck with the neighbor with whom they share contiguous borders. We'd like to see more of that. So the Abraham Accords was the most consequential and obvious splash in that pond. Yeah. That in the wake of the Oslo Accords. So long, period of kind of a dead zone there, and then boom, we get the Abraham Accords with the previous Trump administration. And now, and by the way, the Biden administration never did anything other than build on or try to build on the Abraham Accords. So when they came into office, the intent was never, we're going to throw that out or put new lipstick on it or anything. The idea was we'll just continue because this is a project they recognize that has been a U.S. interest for generations or for decades. Yeah. And that's what the current one and the Trump administration endeavors to do, which is expand the accords, do more integration. It actually moves out beyond to some, if you think of the main Christmas tree, if you will, as the Abraham Accords, then you also have a couple other agreements which would supplement and add on to that. We have I2U2, Israel, India, United States, United Arab Emirates. That's another aspect or a branch, if you prefer, off the tree. We have IMEC, which is an additional one, which is a Middle East corridor. Yeah. And so, the idea shot throughout the whole thing is integrate, integrate, integrate. So for those of you who may be more students of Europe or of history than you are of the Middle East, or maybe both, think the Marshall Plan and think the intent and the idea and the design behind the Marshall Plan. So it's not a template that it looks exactly the same if you drop it on top of the post-World War II Marshall Plan, but the intent and many of the fundamentals are in fact drawn from that.
Got it. So the other piece of news that Tori mentioned from yesterday was the hostage release of the last remaining American dual national hostage, which is very, very, very welcome.
Yes.
But there's, of course, more hostages still being held that we believe are alive by Hamas. And, of course, Israel's continuing its offensive in Gaza as well. So this conflict has been roiling around in the region and the world for a year and a half now. Where do you see things going? Again, I'm not asking for crystal ball, but what's the trend line right now? And is there, we don't have a ceasefire anymore right now. We had one for a brief period and got a whole bunch of hostages out. Is there a chance to get the rest of those hostages? Is there an opportunity to try and get another ceasefire going?
So we've been leaning very hard, as you may have imagined or know, into exactly that throughout. So even without a ceasefire, and in fact, especially without a ceasefire, working that very hard through a number of angles. Again, if you've been following this at all, you will have seen most of it played out publicly, maybe not in the moment, but shortly thereafter. Vis-a-vis working with neighbors and partners in the region, various intermediaries, be it Qatar, be it Egypt, be it any other state who has been involved as an intermediary or facilitator, and then just bilaterally. So Diplo speak for us and whoever the other party is. So we've been doing all of those things, and the intent throughout has remained get the hostages out and get assistance in. It's been a very fundamental equation, and that's exactly how it looks. Out, in, or that's the ideal. But of course, as anybody who's lived for more than a minute knows, the devil is in the details, and boy is the devil there, and there sure are a lot of details. So, I've seen a lot of things in open space, pro-con, hurling grenades, figuratively speaking, one direction or another, over one or another sets of policies. But I would offer you this. Our objectives remain the same. Again, get innocents out of the way of harm, get assistance in. However, do not aid, abet, or enable Hamas to remain. They cannot remain in power, in control. In case any of you don't follow this, and I don't know how many people in the room follow this or with what degree of interest, but Hamas is, and certainly for the U.S. perspective and for our policy, it's what we call an FTO. It's a foreign terrorist organization. So that means we have formally designated this group as a terrorist organization. So that puts them, you don't want to be in that category, right? That's the non-friend end of the ledger. So they are firmly and have been for a long time on that side of the equation. They cannot continue to remain inside of Gaza. So there's a lot of conversation, very understandably, about the fact that, hey, Henry, wait a second, not everybody in Gaza is Hamas. There are people who are Palestinians who aren't Hamas. We know that. We recognize that. This president recognizes that. The last president recognized it. It's a nettlesome matter that's very complex. I know, and I have heard my own relatives go into sort of the reductio ad absurdum model. No, it's not. It's black and white. I once thought those things before I did this for a living, but it's not quite that. It's not quite that simple. Again, key thing for us: Hamas cannot remain. They cannot continue to stay there.
Continuing our tour of the region, if you will. Syria is another place where things have been changing very rapidly. It's been about 6 months since Assad left, along with his family, fleeing to Russia. And the interim leader, there's been a lot of speculation about al-Shara and where he wants to go. He's been saying a lot of interesting and hopeful things. But as always, how is this going to land? He seems to be taking a measured approach. There's speculation that the UAE may be possibly trying to help him as he's trying to accommodate in the region. Where are things going right now in Syria, and kind of what's their planning for how they want to move ahead? And does that work for us? And how are we dealing with this situation? Because it's obviously still very much in flux.
Well, influx captures it very nicely. So you may have seen the headlines today that the president is going to, or has agreed to meet al-Shara. This is the figure who has been, his career, if you want to call it that, was as, certainly by the U.S. standards, a terrorist. And in fact, I can remember when he had a name designating him as a target earlier in my career, and I remember, everybody was after him. So here we have arrived at a very odd moment by any standard of measure, where he has been he is what we call the head of the interim authorities. It's the term we use because we don't recognize a government there yet. So President Trump has decided that he would, and again, you will have seen this in today's headlines, lift the sanctions, and that he will meet Shara in Riyadh. So this is enormous.
That's a big deal.
And it's it really kind of follows a signature President Trump move of known on the domestic front very often as a disruptive technique. But this really is, I think, and I rarely use this word, I'm not going to say unprecedented, took that out of my lexicon many years ago, but it's extraordinary.
Yeah. No.
Now, the real question here is, what will the interim authorities do? So they have said many of the right things, but the real question here for the United States is, what will they do? It's kind of a proof in the pudding, right? So you got to walk your talk. You know, the data, I'll defer to scholars for scholarship, but the data on folks who have been jihadis turning the corner is not fat and thick. In fact, I can't think of an example. So that has folks naturally very skeptical about who are we dealing with here. This is opportunism. It's a movement to accrue power within. We don't want to be in a position of aiding and abetting that. Who knows what the agenda is, where these folks are going. So those are the concerns. They're not inappropriate.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the other concerns, and in an earlier conversation here with your colleagues this morning, we talked about balance, which is profoundly an art. Some would even call it more voodoo, but what it is not is science. So it's a by-the-moment calibration of the interests that you've got, kind of a on the one hand, on the other hand, right? So think of the Hippocratic Oath, which we don't really have in diplomacy, but maybe we ought to. The medical profession has, which is do no harm, right? So, but this is sort of the analog for us. We want to see where these guys go. We have given them a set of markers, all of which are really blindingly obvious in terms of if you want to come in from out of the cold, here are the things you need to do. So, for instance, any U.S. citizens and their remains enable us to get those U.S. citizens and or their remains.
Yeah.
Probably the best known case to most folks in the public is of the journalist Austin Tice.
Yeah.
There have been others, but that's one of the better known ones. We need to know their fate, and we need to bring this to closure for human decency, and also because for those of us in the Department of State, it's also our job.
Yep.
So that's a for instance. Another for instance is the Assad regime had quite a collection of chemical weapons to which they had no compunctions, painfully, about using, and of course on their own people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where are the chemical weapons? We want you to cooperate with what's known in diplomatic terms as OPCW, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. Cooperate with them about finding any of these cached sites, storage, wherever these chemical munitions and weaponry may be, and we want to get them out.
Yeah.
Don't allow your country to become a platform or stage where it can become a threat to others in the region, notably, for our purposes, our allies, Jordan, Israel, there are others, Turkey. And the list goes on, but again, these are things that are not brain-bending, but but all of them are some are harder and some are less hard to do.
Yeah.
But those are the things, they're very straightforward. There's nothing here that is fantastical in its notion that we would ask of them, but these are the kinds of things that you can do. A very key one for us is foreign terrorist fighters. If you've got foreign terrorist fighters there, and they do, heaven forfend that you should put them into positions of authority as officials in your new governmental structures. And your minority populations, the Alawites, the Christians, the Druze, bring them into your government. Be a Syrian government that is representative and accessible to all of your people who are also Syrians.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a big laundry list, but straightforward.
It's straightforward, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing about any of this that is mystical or bizarre. It's very straightforward.
So I'm giving my warning now to my students because I'm going to turn to you for questions after this one. But I guess I'd like to end kind of where you were ambassador. You've mentioned Jordan in conjunction with a number of these situations. They sit right in the middle of all this, and obviously have a pretty difficult neighborhood.
Yes.
But at the same time, they're a very important ally, and have been for a number of years. The current king's father very courageously signed a peace treaty with the government of Israel back in Clinton administration.
Before it was cool.
Yeah. Very famous photo of he and Mubarak and everybody gathered with President Clinton at the White House to sign that treaty. But Jordan's been under a lot of stress. They've had refugees from Syria. They've had refugees, long-standing refugee population of Palestinians. The Iraq War was right on their neighborhood and impacted them as well. Syria's instability and current situation also impacts them. So how are things going in Jordan? And what are you hearing from people you know there about where they see the region going and their role in the region?
Yeah. So you've captured it very well by saying that it's a ducky neighborhood, right, to live in. So there are to be graceful challenges from many directions, and some of them seem to be omnipresent. And when one disappears, and another one has an unfortunate habit of popping up. So the Jordanians and the Hashemite kingdom have proven to be remarkably resilient. We don't want to take them or any of our allies for granted. Every one of these situations requires, both in terms of the diplomacy, I will leave to the king and to Jordanians to speak about running their own kingdom. But, as you do these things diplomatically, as you work the diplomacy, you realize they have to be led and they have to be organized every single day. All of these situations do. Because when you're not, to put it in the terms of one of our former colleagues, most recently former DCIA, Bill Burns, before that a career Foreign Service officer, the garden has to be tended. And it requires regular ministrations and it requires routine tending. Because when you're not doing those things, that's when the bad things tend to happen, when you're not on watch. So we continue to take counsel from the Jordanians about their neighborhood. We listen to it. We value it. They live there. We don't, despite our interests and despite our frequent trips there. And they have an understanding, as do the Israelis, as do the Iraqis, as do all the rest of them, right? They know their ground better than we're ever going to know their ground. In the end of the day, of course, at least for the interests of the United States, we have to make our own decisions. Think again about our conversation earlier about sovereign operations, sovereign activities, what it means to be a sovereign state. So the decision about what to do, at least in the interest of the United States, that's an us thing. But we take in this counsel, we watch it. It is always very useful for the United States to have an ally. I hesitate to use the words, well, let's just put it this way, out on the ramparts, out on the edges, right? We could put a number of our allies who are in the region on exactly that position. They're the first ones to face the strong or ill winds. And the relationship, it's a two-way street, of course, as all healthy relationships are, which is while we give a lot, we get a lot in return as well.
It's a partnership.
It's a partnership. We often use the term strategic partnership to differentiate the level.
Great. So I'd like to turn now to questions from our audience here. And if those online have questions, please submit them and we'll see where we go. But I've already got a couple of folks. We'll ask that you wait for the microphones. Okay. Please.
Hi, thank you so much. My question is, since Trump has announced removing sanctions from Syria, does the U.S. see a role for reconstruction aid in Syria right now, or do you think that's kind of off the table during the transition period?
So I suspect in the immediate moment, at least in terms of reconstruction vis-a-vis the United States and its own involvement in it, yeah, I think that's out on the horizon right now, if there will be such a thing. And the lifting of the sanctions, I've been up here in Hanover while that's been happening overseas, not even back in Washington, right? So I'm waiting. I had a couple phone calls in between today, but trying to figure out where exactly are we on the details here. And suffice to say, we're still sorting a lot of the details out, but the paramount issue, which is the president's determination to do this, sends a powerful signal. Sends a powerful signal to the region. It sends it obviously to the interim authorities and also to the Europeans, because the flow of refugees and the effects as they rumbled out of the epicenter of Syria, hit their shores first in Europe before they come to the United States. So the particulars of how we're going to work out who will do what are still in the TBD column. But it's hugely important, also and especially if, we mentioned a moment ago, Jordan, if economies like Jordan's can benefit from that, whether they're a platform from which people base and do reconstruction when comes that time, or if they participate in it, or all the above. So I still don't know what those particulars are just yet.
So I've got Ari in the back, and then I'll come down here.
Thank you again. As a follow-up to Sophia's question, in your role at the moment, would you have expected under other presidents to have greater knowledge of this announcement by President Trump before he made it? Or is this kind of how foreign policy gets made and that everyone will then assemble behind the president?
That's a great question. I mean, look, at the end of the day, with any administration, the U.S. president is the chief decision maker. Certainly in our system, that's the way it works. And some of them want more of a deliberative process in play, and they want to go through and chew through and vet sort of and shoot the corners in every direction. And really ruminate and have their agencies and departments and so forth do a lot of that. Other presidents will take that more under wing themselves, take the counsel of their cabinet. Where are we? They'll get an explanation or a brief on it, and then they'll say, and it's not unique to President Trump, this moment, yes, is unique to him, but then they'll say, okay, we're not doing X or we're going to do X, as the case may be. So this is a signature President Trump move. It's audacious. It's bold by any standard, and it's decisive.
And I mean, we've seen this going back to Nixon in China,
yeah,
where
absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, so we've got many examples.
Yep.
I can also think of, the decision on the Iraq War was not ruminated over for a long time in the George W. Bush administration.
Correct.
So yeah. So I'd like to come down here, and then I'll come up to Prescott, and then I'll bounce around. I'm going to keep. Sorry, I'm hanging with my students. So if there's students over here, raise your hand high. So please.
Hi, thank you so much for coming today. My question is with respect to the conflict between Hamas and Israel. In class, we've talked about how the Israeli government doesn't have a lot of incentive at the current moment to come to the negotiating table, and how the United States is one of the few international actors who could pressure them to do that. And I was wondering if you think that it's in the United States' interest to do so, and if there's anything that the United States values that would encourage them to do so.
So Israel is in many ways a special case in the pantheon of U.S. partners. And one of the reasons is, among any number perhaps, but one of the reasons is the continuing, I'll call it a fantasy, the continuing fantasy that if Washington only told them, and this is not unique to this moment, right? If Washington only told or made or urged or pressured the Israelis to do X, Y, or Z, they'd hop to it. Well, the record has shown us through these decades that it's not exactly like that. Even when perhaps we may have wanted such a moment, that it just doesn't work out like that. So do they take into consideration, and do they value, and do they place a high value on whatever it is that Washington thinks, yeah, we're really close partners and we're very close allies, and there are enormous ties well beyond anybody sitting in their government or ours that go well below and beyond and outside of government-to-government chats. However, the notion really, and this is something, by the way, that I have learned too, watching it through the years, the notion that if we just pressure them, so-and-so needs to call so-and-so, and, by God, things would, get cracking. So again, I don't want to suggest that they're impervious to these things. I don't think they are. But the notion that, we just don't want it bad enough, or if we did, it would look different, I can assure you that's not true. So we have wanted any number of things bad, and we have pressured and done all the things we do when we close doors and get in there, tete-a-tete, with any number of countries, including other close allies like the UK. And it doesn't, at the end of the day, they decide to do their thing. When I was in the military, we had an axiom, which was and this is wrong here because unfortunately the axiom in the military was the enemy, but it was always the enemy also gets a vote, meaning so you can have the best laid plans, but the other guy gets to decide their own plans, and often they do, and often it's not something we welcome. Yeah. So this is somewhat of a flip on if there were a diplomatic axiom like that, you get the idea, right?
So I've got Prescott, and then Amman, and then Maddie, and then in the back, so.
Thanks again so much for coming. To move attention to the Maghreb, Tunisia has gone from one of the few examples of a democracy emerging after the Arab Spring to President Said recently winning his election with 90% of the vote, but jailing some of his opposition during this election campaign. How has U.S.-Tunisian relationships changed over your tenure, especially with Said's more democratic backsliding tendencies?
Yeah, so the backsliding tendencies have not redounded, certainly to his benefit, in our eyes. I have to presume he thinks it's in his interest to operate that way. I can't figure out, honestly, why. I mean, the first couple impulses, okay, you're establishing your own credentials or getting a certain, okay. But again, it's the prerogative. I have mentioned before, earlier in our chat, the notion of sovereign entities, sovereign states, and they get to make their own decisions. Here's another classic example. So in our mind, in our rational actor model, why would someone do something that to Washington's way of thinking isn't in their best interests? Well, they do it all the time. So you've picked one example, and there are any number of them out there. So if my job was simply going to a bunch of people who thought anything the United States did, or most things we did, was pretty damn good, then you wouldn't really need too much in the way of diplomacy because everybody kind of is self-actualized doing it for us. That's not the way it works. So I would love to know what goes on inside his mind. It hasn't been a relationship that has been as vibrant as it could have been. But again, we have to respect the fact that, you are a sovereign state and you get to make your own decisions. Now, I would add one caveat. We have maintained strong and very positive relations with their military. They have continued to be great partners in the Sahel and in other areas, and on missions and issues vital. We would like to say to both our interests, but certainly to the interests of the United States, with any number of malfactors operating in the Sahel and other such things, they have remained and continue to be a very reliable partner on those issues.
Amman.
Thank you for being here. My question goes back to Israel-Palestine. One of the things we learned in Professor Holt's class was that if a country or a people stand any chance to be politically viable, that there needs to be something different than dependency on aid. Aid dependency doesn't work. We're seeing that now, especially with the shutting down of USAID, that dependency is very bad, to say the least. And on top of that, it's clear that many of the threats or the groups that the U.S. says that is a threat to U.S. national security have goals and fight with goals for Palestinian statehood. With these two in mind, these two ideas in mind, and on top of that, that Hamas is not simply a group of select people, but they're continuously recruiting, how do we approach U.S. policy where it's not simply hostages out, aid in, but hostages out and try to fight for Palestinian statehood, which would create what we would assume is long, viable change, not only for Palestinians and not only for Israelis, but also the region as a whole in U.S. interests, because those threats are continuously being fought with the root of Palestinian statehood in mind.
Yeah. We have some fundamentals when it comes to the Gaza conflict. And I don't want to repeat myself, but I was in some other sessions today. You were in one of them. But those things have not mutated since you and I spoke. So, for instance, Hamas, inside of Gaza, can they continue to still be there? No. Why does that matter in terms of what you brought up about, for instance, Palestinian statehood, the pull, the recruiting factor, and so forth? Because until such time as they are out of the picture, the conversation, if we are to have it, about such a thing, statehood, cannot occur until that first problem is dealt with. So we're dealing with what I'm going to call the wolf closest to the sled. So think triage, right? So the immediate problem at hand is they cannot continue to be there, period. And they cannot in any way have a hand in governance, period. The rest of the equation is still open, meaning nothing has been etched into platinum, nothing has been sealed off in the way of what the future might bring, could bring, will bring. But what cannot be is we cannot continue to have Hamas inside of Gaza and continue, obviously, to be an armed threat, nor to be in the governance in whatever day after we have when the shooting stops. That's the paramount issue right now. And until such time as that issue is resolved or a solution or something is found for that, the rest of the conversations, including the one you have just brought up, will not take place. Would you do it the same? Would you do it the same way, or the next person perhaps not? But that's our position.
Sorry, I just want to ask a quick follow-up. One of the things that you had mentioned was getting Hamas out of there, which is totally understandable if that is the U.S.'s policy. But my question was more towards, how do we go about doing that? Do we do that if the goal is viability and the goal is getting Hamas out of there? Is the right step, based on countless facts of history that we've seen, events from history from other countries, is the right step to do that the militarization of a region or parts of a region? And because they are continuously, like I said, continuously recruiting, when does militarization become ineffective and just harming civilians and not doing any good? Is there another way? Could there possibly be another way?
Yeah. So, Eamon, it's clear that you have done a lot of thinking about this, and it merits that kind of consideration, right? It's a super nettlesome matter with enormous issues at stake, like life and death, and then, of course, the future and stability in the region, and it merits all those considerations. So to the answer of, is it the best model? I can't remember your formulation, but something along those lines. I'm not sure. Is that my reserved way of saying I don't think so? No, it is not. It's just at the moment we don't have a better vision. And that is precisely what the president and what the Secretary of State put on the table, which was you don't like the plan or the idea or the suggestions, please come up with a better way. Give it to us, show it to us, bring it to us. And to date, we don't have that. And we have asked explicitly for it, and we have asked repeatedly for it. And the two things that we have established for criteria in it are there has to be an answer to this security matter, i.e. Armed guys with AKs. What are you going to do about security, specifically about getting them out of the picture? And then second element, governance. Who will govern? How will you govern? And again, these are not elusive concepts. There's nothing mysterious about any of this, but they are damn hard. They're really hard. So I don't mean to suggest that because they're hard, we're providing extensions on the homework ad infinitum. At the end of the day, it's not ours to own. So we have a stake in it, we have an interest in it, and it's a high stake. But we have asked that question repeatedly.
Yeah. Maddie.
Hi, well, Eamon just took my questions. That was great. So I guess I'll
That
pivot
was
a little
easy.
bit. You touched on refugee repatriation. I know this is a big issue.
Touched on, I'm sorry?
Refugee repatriation. Yeah. We know this is a big issue, particularly in Jordan. And so I'm curious if you could just provide us with an update on refugee repatriation to Syria. What is the U.S. doing to prevent forced repatriation and ensure that all returns are voluntary? And also if you could provide us with an update about al-Hol, or kind of large refugee camps, and what the situation and U.S. policy looks like regarding refugee camps.
So the United States has made clear that a term you may be familiar with, refoulement, forced repatriation, or forcing refugees back, cannot take place. We want to see refugees return home when the conditions provide it, i.e., it's secure, it's safe. That's what we want to happen. We know that this displacement, leaving aside the very painful human quotient for each family or individual and person, we also know what it does across the region in terms of the stresses. So we've got a lot in Lebanon who's not really equipped to carry a lot of this. I think we mentioned Jordan earlier as well, and also in a number of places in Europe.
Turkey.
Yeah, and Turkey, of course, who I think has per capita the greatest number. Thank you for remembering. We do not think and have not thought that the idea of forced repatriation is good. So let's put that into the no column. We don't want to do that. In terms of al-Hol, for those of you not familiar with al-Hol, you've got between terrorists, members of al-Qaeda and of Daesh, ISIS, and family members. So the family members in many cases are also radicalized. So they're not fighters per se, but they're also radicalized. Why do I bring that up? Because the countries to which they belong, whatever country of which they are a citizen, has said, not so keen, with some exceptions. So Iraq has done a striking job of taking back huge amounts of their citizens. So we're not done, but they have been doing a remarkable job. I served in Western Europe as well, and I remember going in dutifully carrying my démarche instructions from Washington about, hey, we'd really like you to go get your people. They are your people. Hey, no, not so much. So, this is a vexum issue for them because, hey, you're telling me you want us to go and get whatever number in a particular country. You want us to go get them, bring them back to name the country, wherever, And we don't really have a way or model to rehabilitate them. They are radicalized, in our judgment, sort of likely beyond a point of return. Come back and talk to us, tomorrow. As they would say in Arabic, bukra bad bukra, except we're not talking Arabs, we're talking, the Western world, right? So, and someone mentioned a moment ago, Tunisia, huge number of foreign fighters who come from Tunisia, but I don't mean to besmirch merely Tunisia. There are a lot of countries who have fighters there, again, and their family. We're talking tens of thousands. And people have not been really keen about, in our judgment, it's your responsibility because they're your citizens. Yes, we know this is going to be very hard, but it's not our responsibility as the United States, but we're paying a lot of the bills. Not only us, but we're paying huge amounts here, the preponderance. And it's time for you to belly up to the bar here and to take your folks. So that is a priority issue of trying to get those numbers down as low as we can. One of the contributing, complicating factors here was that the SDF, Syrian Democratic Forces, Kurds who were doing bulk of the fighting and bleeding vis-a-vis the de-ISIS, Defeat ISIS campaign, the counterterrorism campaign. They were the very tippy point of the spear in terms of the fighting, and are close allies in this fight for years. They have also been guarding, providing the security to these camps. But as they would also be contending with a variety of other things, their spats with Turkey and so forth and so on, this would pull them off the camps, or the danger could pull them all off the camps and off of security there as they would move towards their villages and towns, families, etc., to protect them. While at the same time, what happens if you have a jailbreak, so to speak, right, on a camp and its surrounding camps? Al-Hol is a place, but there are surrounding camps. And again, tens of thousands of these. You're really pulling the lid off Pandora's box, and that's being gentle. Do you want that? So we're doing all we can to encourage all of our partners in the region and in Europe and in some other parts of the world, not only in Europe and in the region, to take back their citizens so that we can pull this down and be done with this.
Yeah, and there's citizens from
all over.
From 50 or plus countries. I mean, it's a very, having delivered some of these demarches myself, it's like, oh, Lord, we've been at this for a while.
Yeah, it's kind of an inverted, Stranger Things, that land underneath United Nations, right? Where all flags, many countries, but not doing the Lord's work, so to speak.
Yeah. I had a question in the back row, yeah.
Yeah, I was hoping to zoom out a little and look back at the past 3 administrations and the flip-flopping of foreign policy. I'm wondering how that's impacted your ability to depict America as a long-term credible commitment partner, and also if you actually think it is worse now than it's been in the past.
When you say worse, the it that's worse is?
As in the shifting of foreign policy agendas and that impact.
Okay.
Well, and you maybe even zoom a little bit further out, because you've served under, 5, 6 presidents now?
At least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is a long-term issue.
Yeah. Look, U.S. policies will shift in any number of directions, sometimes dramatically and sometimes imperceptible, even to a close student. Well, imperceptible. It's not like you couldn't figure it out, but it's not obvious, right? And other times it's going boom in your face. It's so, there's such dramatic shifts and changes. But throughout this, U.S. objectives and certainly the mission of the U.S. objectives and the mission of the Department of State and of U.S. diplomacy remain fairly constant. And it's that we communicate when we sit down inside the drawing rooms, or the homes as the case may be, or wherever it is, with foreign partners, governments, people not in government, opinion shapers, whoever they may be, students. intellectuals, who have you. And it's the constant interests of the United States that diplomacy, the US diplomacy, is, whatever else it's doing, always communicating. And it's that constant tether and that constant tie, and it's that presence. Those are the things that remain constant. So at any given moment, you're right, that person sitting across the table from you will be celebrating the decisions Washington has made. And at any given moment, that person sitting across the table from you will be putting both of their hands up in front of their face. Henry, what are you thinking here? Right? So it ranges the spectrum, and that is a normal warp and woof. And you chose the term sort of, what was it? Did you say standing back or looking? Zooming out, right? So zoomed out over the long term, that's true. A snapshot taken in a moment of time at any minute can be mind-boggling, right? To an observer who knows only that snapshot, or that snapshot in 1, 3, 8, what are other ones, but is missing the 38,421 that comprise the total. So I won't deny that we take some U-turns. I won't deny that we take some sharp 90-degree turns. We hit the brakes, we accelerate, we do any number of these things. But again, there is a constancy that you can trace in the way of the interests of the United States and how we convey them and communicate them over that long term.
And I think part of that stability has been our presence, as you said. The communication relies very heavily on our embassies, right?
Yes.
Can you, just for our students here who are interested in international affairs, which all these folks very much are, can you just say a word or two about, how did you decide to work on the Middle East? Did you grow up speaking Arabic? Did you grow up in a multicultural household? Did somebody take you traveling when you were a kid? What was your path?
Well, guilty, and guilty to many of the things that you just mentioned. So I didn't speak English till I was about 4.5, even though my very Anglo-Saxon name wouldn't indicate that. My first language was Syriac Aramaic. Not a scholar of it, it was just an accident of my birth, right? So my mother is Assyrian, a Christian group spread across much of the Middle East and through some of Turkey. My father's a Maine Yankee, given that we're our proximate distance right now to Maine. So yes, I, by the accident of my birth, nothing more, no career plan, obviously, but just having been born into that family, I did grow up understanding from that side of my family. You tend sometimes to see the world different than this side of my family. But you both claim you love me, right? So that contributed to it. And I think really that was the gestation, without question. And then that led to a chain of events, kind of like either you've maybe read it to someone young or had it read to you by your parents, the book, If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. Anybody know? Anybody that ring a bell? Yeah, okay, right.
Some head nods.
So if you give a mouse a cookie, so if A, then B, and if B, then C, and so that was sort of the way it worked out.
Yeah, that's great.
And yes, was taken traveling and did live in Iran for much of my youth. That was obviously the days of the Shah's Iran, right?
Yeah.
Grew up, and then came to the States, and I remember when everybody wanted to, the first pass at this, bomb Iran, right? And I remember thinking, why? Because I'm thinking of people I knew and friends, and I was a kid, I was a student, a high school student, right?
Yeah.
And so these things were. I was always seeing those two sides. My mother, it would be too long of a story to go into here. I know you two know it, but. My mother, although an Assyrian, grew up in the Soviet Union, longer story. And so all of my life, my mother was never confident in English. writing. So she would always write me letters in Russian. So this was a particularly odd moment one day in the Army when in the field, the visiting helicopter that brought supplies and so forth brought our mail. And I was sitting down on a tree stump or something, reading a letter from my mother. Those are the days when you didn't get email, right? People wrote, it was on paper. And I read the letter from my mother, and a guy sitting next to me eating did a double take and looks over. He goes, "What is that?" And I said, "It's a letter from my mother." Duh. And he goes, "No, I mean, what is that?" And it dawned on me that, oh yeah, right, he's looking at the Cyrillic. And so yes, I mean, that was part of my background, and again, not given away by anything the old adage about judging books and covers, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I would like to say thank you for giving us an insight into the region, giving us a really broad overview of all the challenges that are there. Can you leave us with one thing that gives you hope, that you think is kind of critical to the region right now?
In candor and in honesty, without playing to the audience, I would say you. I really, no kidding, mean that. It's people who have curiosity of mind. You are going to shape the future. You will be the future. And I would encourage you to maintain this curiosity. I hope you keep it up. May all go off and be bankers and lawyers. I don't know. That's what most of my classmates did. But occasionally some of us take the wrong path, joking, and we go into public service. So I would really encourage you to do it. You don't have to join the Foreign Service to do that. You can do it any number of ways, but including staying in the academy or what have you, and in business, of course, to be fair. But hopefulness is always that. It's people who've had the benefit, which you all have had, of having a good education, a terrific education, and being surrounded by curious and intelligent classmates and faculty, and having these opportunities. I mean, I think but it's easy to forget when you're in it, that you're in rarefied atmosphere, and you are not like the rest of the world. The rest of the world is not having mostly this opportunity. Are there analogs to you in the US? Yes. Are there analogs to you in other places? Yes. But all in total, you are a distinct minority. And so I really place hope in the fact that some of you don't all need to do it, but some of you do make the decision, and you do hear that calling, if you will, or that voice, and you do feel drawn into public service. And again, you don't have to do it in public service. As we said, you can do it from a number of areas, but that you forge those connections, you use these educations, and you use your minds and your talents and your experiences, and you take that out into the world. I know it sounds kind of hokey, and it did to me when I was your age, but I'll tell you that it's true. Yeah. It really, really is. One of the things that delivers the most disproportionate return for the United States on our investment is what is known as soft diplomacy. Yeah. We spend maybe the change in the cushions, behind the cushions on your couch, representatively speaking, to do these programs, but to teach kids, and they are overwhelmingly kids, they're young people, teach them English, or fund them to come to the States for a summer, or to a semester, or to university, or they're high school kids, or they're college kids, or whatever they may be. And having sat across from those people in their adult formation through the years, when I'm looking at the Prime Minister of Pakistan, or for that matter, of the UK, and I'm looking at the Foreign Minister of fill in the blank, or I'm looking at the whoever, and they don't have to all be officials in these positions, and realizing they can finish my sentences for me because they get me. They get us because they've been here. They've been sitting next to you in class. They've been your roommate. They've been on that bus with you, going to the airport. They've been in the classroom with you. Yeah. They've been sitting up all night saying, do you think we should go get a cup of coffee? I don't know, I'm going to finish this paper. And so forth and so on. And all of that matters. It all matters. It all counts. And when you can see, usually later in your life, if we take sort of an arc of story perspective to this, that I won't claim there's any great design and play in the universe. There may be, I just don't know. But I can tell you that these things really count, and they benefit the United States, and not, in fact, maybe at least the US government per se, but they benefit America, they benefit our commerce, our industry, our understanding, our way of looking at the world, our understanding, and yes, they benefit the US government.
Great. Please join me in thanking Ambassador Wooster for being here with us today. Really appreciate it.